Please, just a little flour. I'll pay when the harvest comes.
We don't feed beggars here, miss.
Maybe the mountain will feed you if you can climb it.
You find laughter easy. Let's see you stand.
We were only joking.
Then laugh now.
You didn't have to come.
No one mocks hunger in my valley.
The sun hung low over Elk Hollow, its last light slanting across the frozen earth like fire dying on the coals. The wind came in slow breaths from the mountains, carrying the dry taste of snow and pine, whispering through the bare cottonwoods that lined the single dirt road leading into town. A wagon creaked along that road, its wheels grinding against ice. The woman driving it sat straight, though her shoulders trembled under a threadbare shawl. Her hands were red with cold, her lips pale. Clara Hensley had not eaten in 2 days. Her fields were dust, her hens long dead, her husband buried under a cross of cedar she carved herself. What she had left of him was a rusted wedding band and the memory of how he used to hum while splitting wood. Now, only silence split the air, silence and the groan of the wagon. When she reached town, the few men outside the saloon looked up. Not with kindness, but with the idle curiosity men reserve for something fragile about to break. One tipped his hat mockingly. Another spat into the dirt and muttered, "Still not dead, huh?" Clara ignored them, though the words settled like stones inside her chest. She climbed down from the wagon and tied the reins to the post outside Dobbs' general store. Inside, the air was warmer but meaner. The smell of tobacco and whiskey clung to the walls. 2 men stood by the stove, boots up on the rail, laughing low about something. Behind the counter, old Dobbs wiped a glass jar with a rag that had seen more grease than water. His mustache twitched when he saw her. "Afternoon, Widow Hensley," he said, drawing out the word widow like a curse. "What brings you into town?" "I came for flour," she said, her voice steady though it scraped against her throat. "I can pay next week. I've got a calf near due, and the hide will fetch enough." Dobbs set the jar down and leaned forward. "Ain't running a charity here. You got coin you buy. You don't you beg. And I don't trade with beggars." Clara's fingers tightened around the small paper note she'd brought, the one her husband had signed years ago when he'd done hauling work for Dobbs. "This was his credit," she said quietly. "You said he'd have stored trust for what he hauled." Dobbs snorted. "That was years ago. He's gone. Debt's gone with him." The men by the stove chuckled. One, Miller, grinned with yellow teeth. "Reckon she could work it off, Dobbs," he said. "Got strong hands for a widow." The other one, Haskins, leaned his elbow on the counter. "Yeah. A night or two's work, and she might earn herself a sack of flour." Their laughter filled the room. Clara didn't move. Her eyes fixed on Dobbs, gray, unwavering, stripped of every ounce of softness. For a heartbeat, even the laughter faltered under that look. Then she turned, slow and deliberate, and walked out into the cold. The door shut behind her with a sound that felt final. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow danced in thin, twisting lines over the dirt. Her boots crunched as she crossed the street, the wagon waiting where she'd left it. She climbed up, the reins stiff in her hands, and set off back toward the hills. From the ridge beyond town, a man watched. He sat his horse like he'd grown there, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his breath. His beard was gray at the edges, his coat patched with old leather. The rifle laid across his saddle was worn smooth by use. Luke Avery had seen 100 winters in these mountains, most of them alone. He'd come down to trade pelts once or twice, but men in Elk Hollow looked at him like they looked at storms, something to fear, something best avoided. He preferred it that way. Yet that evening, as he watched the widow drive her empty wagon through the cold, something inside him shifted. Her small figure disappeared along the frozen road, swallowed by twilight. Luke remained a while longer, listening. When he finally turned his horse toward his high camp, the silence of the woods followed close, heavy and thinking. By the time Clara reached her homestead, night had sunk its claws into the valley. The cabin sat crooked against a rise of wind-blown earth, smoke barely whispering from the chimney. She unharnessed the horse, rubbed its flank with shaking hands, and led it into the lean-to. Inside, the air was sharp, and the fire low. She laid her shawl across the table, sat down, and stared at the empty shelf where the flower should have been. Her stomach knotted, but worse than hunger was the sound of laughter still echoing in her head. She pressed her palms together and prayed, though she wasn't sure who she was speaking to anymore. Maybe to her husband. Maybe to God. Maybe just to the silence itself. Hours passed. The wind moaned through the cracks, making the lantern flicker. Outside, snow began to fall in earnest. She added one last piece of wood to the fire and tried to sleep. Far above the valley, Luke's campfire burned low. He sat beside it, sharpening a knife that didn't need sharpening, his thoughts circling like wolves. He'd known cruelty. Men who'd taken more than food or coin during the war, men who called it order and left towns burning. The sound of the widow's silence in that store replayed in his mind. He'd seen men mock the weak before. He'd buried some of them, too. Down in the hollow, the night deepened. Then came the faint rhythm of hooves. 3 sets, slow and deliberate. Clara stirred awake, heart hammering. She blew out the lantern and reached for the iron poker by the hearth. Through the crack in the boards, torchlight wavered in the storm. Voices. "Well, well," Miller called out. "Thought we'd pay a friendly visit. Town's quiet tonight." Haskins laughed. "Bet she's lonely up here." Clara's breath caught. She backed away from the door, clutching the poker tight. The handle was slick with sweat. The men dismounted, boots crunching on the frozen ground. One of them rattled the latch. "Leave," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the wind. "Open up, Miss Hensley," Miller drawled. "Ain't polite to keep company waiting." When she didn't move, the first blow hit the door. The wood groaned but held. Another strike, harder this time. The hinges screamed. She raised the poker as the door burst inward. Torchlight spilled across the room. The heat of it touched her face, and she swung blindly. The poker struck a shoulder, a man cursed. Then hands grabbed her, rough and sudden. She fought like something cornered, biting, clawing, striking again. One torch fell, rolling near the hearth. Sparks leapt onto the rug. Outside, thunder cracked, but it wasn't thunder. It was a rifle shot, far away but echoing like warning. The men froze, eyes darting toward the window. What was that? One hissed. Another sound followed, hooves, closer this time, pounding through snow. "Someone's coming," Haskins whispered. "We gotta." The window shattered inward. A shape filled the doorway, tall, broad coat flaring with the wind behind him. Luke's rifle leveled, his voice calm as stone. "Leave her." For a second, no one breathed. The torchlight caught his eyes, cold, steady, and old with judgment. The men stepped back. "This ain't your business, stranger," Miller spat, though his voice shook. Luke's tone didn't rise. "It is now." Dawn came gray and brittle, a sky of frozen glass above the valley. Luke woke to the smell of smoke. Not the thin ribbon of a morning fire, but heavy, acrid wrong. He rose without a sound, slinging his rifle over one shoulder, his horse shifting nervously in the cold. The smoke drifted from the direction of the widow's cabin, a black thread twisting above the snow. He mounted and rode fast, the wind tearing at his coat, the world a blur of frost and pine. As he neared the hollow, the smell thickened, char and burned cloth, the faint metallic tang of fear. The cabin door hung broken on one hinge. Snow blew through the opening like breath through a wound. Inside, everything was overturned. The small table lay shattered, the chair in splinters. Near the hearth, half buried in ash, lay Clara. Her hair had come loose, streaked with soot. Her cheek was bruised purple where a man's hand had struck her. Luke dismounted before the horse had stopped moving. He crouched beside her, fingers at her throat. A pulse faint but there. He let out a slow breath, one hand steadying her shoulder. "You're safe now," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. He lifted her carefully, his arms sure and gentle despite their strength. The smell of her hair, smoke cold, and something faintly sweet like lavender gone dry, cut through the frost around him. He laid her across his saddle, wrapped her in his coat, and led the horse toward the timberline where the wind was quieter and no one ever came. His cabin sat high in the pines, a single room built from hand-hewn logs, smoke curling softly from the chimney. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, carried her inside, and laid her near the fire. Snow fell from his boots in clumps. He knelt beside her and worked without hurry, without waste. He tore strips from an old linen sack, soaked them in warm water, and cleaned the blood from her lip. Her breath came shallow but even. When she stirred, he paused. Her eyes opened slightly, clouded with confusion. "You're all right," he said softly. "Don't move." She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. He held a tin cup to her lips, and she drank slowly, wincing. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "North Ridge," he said. "My place." Her eyes flickered toward the fire. The cabin. Still standing. They did what cowards do. Took what they could carry. She closed her eyes again. "They'll come back. Let them try." The words carried no pride, only quiet certainty. He sat back, watching her breathe, the fire's glow playing across her face. Her lashes were damp, her hands small and pale against the rough wool blanket. He saw strength there, buried under fear. A kind of defiance that had not yet broken. Hours passed. The storm outside softened to a whisper. Luke brewed broth from what he had, rabbit and a pinch of salt, and coaxed her to eat. She obeyed like someone remembering life after too long in darkness. When her hands trembled, he steadied the bowl for her. "Why?" she asked, her voice low. "Why help me?" He hesitated, staring into the fire. "I've seen what happens when decent folks get left behind. I won't watch it again." "Did they hurt you too?" she asked after a long pause. His jaw tightened. Not the same men. But men like them. The flames flickered against his face, revealing a scar that ran from his temple down beneath his beard. She said nothing more, but her eyes softened with understanding. Later, when night folded around the cabin, he stoked the fire higher and sat by the door, cleaning his rifle. Clara watched him through half-closed eyes, her mind drifting between wake and dream. The rhythm of his motions, the slow, deliberate care, brought a strange comfort. The world beyond that cabin might have been burning, but here in the circle of firelight, there was calm. Outside, the wolves began to sing. Their howls rose and fell like a prayer carried by wind. Luke listened quietly, head bowed. She stirred. "They sound close." "They always do," he said. "But they keep to their own." Her voice trembled. "I used to think I could too. Keep to my own, I mean. Just me and the land. But the land doesn't care if you starve." He looked at her then, really looked, the hollow of her cheeks, the stubborn light still clinging to her eyes. "The land don't care," he said. "But some folks do." She turned her face toward the fire, hiding the tears that came unbidden. The hours slipped by in silence. When she drifted into sleep, Luke stood and stepped outside. The moon had climbed high, the snow glittering under it like crushed glass. He walked to the edge of the ridge, scanning the valley. In the distance, faint against the pale light, a single flicker of torch fire moved through the trees. He watched it a long time, his hand resting on the rifle's stock. Then he went back inside. Clara woke before dawn to the smell of wood smoke and coffee. Her body ached, but her spirit felt steadier. Luke handed her a cup, the steam curling between them. "You should rest," he said. "I can't." She looked toward the small window, where the first hint of light touched the snow. "They'll come again. You know they will." He nodded. "That's why I didn't sleep." "Why stay?" she asked quietly. "You owe me nothing." He didn't answer right away. The only sound was the fire crackling, the low hum of wind against the walls. Finally he said, "A man don't need a reason to do what's right." Her eyes filled again, not with tears this time, but something deeper, harder to name. "You talk like someone who's lost everything," she said. "I have," he replied. "And sometimes that's when a man finds what's left of himself." She studied him, the way his voice softened at the edges of that truth. Then she reached out, fingertips brushing his hand. The contact was brief, fragile, but it felt like a spark in the cold. He didn't pull away. The day grew brighter. Snow began to melt off the eaves, drops falling like glass beads onto the frozen ground. Luke stepped outside to split wood while Clara cleaned what little she could. The motion helped her forget the ache in her ribs. When she found his carved bird, the small wooden figure he'd shaped by the firelight, it lay on the shelf near the window. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the rough wings. He returned a while later, carrying an armful of wood. She set the carving down quickly, as if caught holding something sacred. "You made that?" she asked. He nodded. "Old habit. Gives the hands something to do when the mind's too loud." "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Looks like it could fly if it wanted to." He smiled faintly, the first real warmth she'd seen from him. Maybe someday. They ate together that evening, simple stew and hard bread, and said little. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. The fire's glow touched their faces in gold. In that silence, something wordless passed between them, a recognition of the same wound carried in different hearts. Outside, night gathered once more. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of hooves across the valley. Luke froze, listening. Clara noticed the way his hand moved automatically toward the rifle. "What is it?" she whispered. He stood and crossed to the window. Far down the slope, faint orange light pulsed between the trees. Torches again, moving slow but steady. His jaw clenched. "They found the trail," he said.